1.4. These linguistic features include passive construction, example, known colloquially as it is built up, is then used, and complex noun phrase construction. Example, the problem of structuring the approach to information studies, a computer database which is then used as a framework to explore the situation and identify problems at a number of levels. The extensive linguistic differences between this textbook and the conversations reflect the fundamental importance of register, associated with contextual differences in production circumstances, purpose, interactiveness, etc. These contextual factors operate in similar ways in all dialects. Thus, conversation is essentially the same, regardless of the dialect of the speakers. Similarly, academic writing is essentially the same, regardless of whether the writer uses a British or American dialect. There are, of course, some differences in pronunciation and word choices associated with different dialects. And there are even occasional differences in grammar. But these differences are minor when compared to the major linguistic differences among different registers associated with different situations of use. 1.4 Different perspective on text varieties, register, genre, and style. In section 1.1, we briefly distinguish among the register, genre, and style perspectives on text. In the following section, we further clarify how we use these terms in the present course. However, the term register, genre, and style have been used in many different ways by previous researchers. Thus, in section 1.4.2 and 1.4.3, we survey the use of these terms in previous research and when necessary, clarify the contrast with our perspective here. 1.4.1 Register, Genre, and Style Perspective in this course. As noted above, we regard genre, register, and style as different approaches or perspective for analyzing text varieties, and not as different kinds of text or different varieties. In fact, the same text can be analyzed from register, genre, and style perspective. As shown in Table 1.1, the three perspectives differ in four major ways with respect to: number 1, the text considered for the analysis. Number 2, the linguistic characteristics considered for the analysis. Number 3, the distribution of those linguistic characteristics. And number 4, the interpretation of linguistic differences. In the genre perspective, the focus is on the linguistic characteristics that are used to structure complete text, while in both the register's perspective and the style perspective, the focus is on the pervasive linguistic characteristics of representative text excerpts from the variety. As summarized in Table 1.1, defining characteristic of registers, genres, and styles. Defining characteristic: textual focus, register, sample of text excerpt, and genre, complete text, style, example of text excerpts. Linguistic characteristic: any lexico-grammatical feature, genre, specialized expression, rhetorical organization, formatting. Any lexico-grammatical in style. The register perspective characterizes the typical linguistic features of text varieties and connects those features functionally to the situational context of the variety. Because the focus is on words and grammatical features that are frequent and pervasive, the analysis can be based on a sample of text excerpts rather than complete text. In contrast to the focus of the register perspective, the genre perspective usually focuses on language characteristics that occur only once in a text. These features serves as crucial role in how texts from a particular variety are constructed. For this reason, genre studies must be based on analysis of complete text from the variety. These language features are conventionally associated with the genre. They conform to the culturally expected way of constructing text belonging to the variety. For example, a general study of business letters would analyze the expected textual conventions for complete letters. These conventions include the expectations that the letter will begin with the date at the top, followed by the name and address of the recipient, followed by salutation and title, followed by the main body of the letter. The letter will then close with some kind of politeness expression. Example, sincerely, followed by the signature of the letter writer. These conventions are part of what defines a letter, and they can be identified only by considering complete letters. This general perspective often focuses on the rhetorical organization of text. From a variety, especially the rhetorical conventions of written varieties. For example, by convention, a front-page newspaper story begins with a concise title and the name of the place where the story occurred. The prose text opens with 1 to 2 sentences that summarize the main event that has occurred and the significance of that event. The text then has multiple paragraphs, each describing some aspects of the story. How the event came about, the background of the main participants, direct and indirect quotations, how other participants became involved, consequences of the event, and etc. These paragraphs are usually very short and self-contained. All of these genre features are exemplified in text sample 1.5. The genre conventions of online news reports are slightly differently, usually beginning with the title and the name of the author, often with a photo image of the author, but no identification of the location. The news story itself thought is in many cases identical to the news articles printed in newspapers. The register and genre perspective differ in the text, the extent to which they can be applied. Complete texts are required to identify the linguistic characteristics associated with the genre perspective. Text excerpts are not adequate for genre analysis because they do not necessarily represent the linguistic conventions that define the genre. Example, the conventional ways to begin or end a text. In contrast, any text sample can be analyzed from a register perspective, considering the typical linguistic features associated with the situational context. These linguistic features occur throughout text from a register, and so complete texts are not required to analyze register characteristics. For example, text samples 1.1 to 1.4 are all excerpts that illustrate the use of pervasive register features, like construction, pronouns, and questions in conversation. Complete texts that are analyzed from a genre perspective can also be analyzed from a register perspective. For example, text sample 1.5, which illustrates the genre conventions for opening a newspaper story, also illustrates the linguistic characteristics that are typical of the register of news reporting. These linguistic features include past tense verbs, killed, example, killed, injured, said, indicated. Passive voice verbs, example, been, tried, were told, were pressed. And reported speech, both direct quotes and indirect reported speech. These features are pervasive in news reports, distributed throughout this text, and thus they can be identified in either complete text or text excerpts. Finally, the style perspective is similar to the register perspective in that it considers the typical linguistic features associated with a collection of text samples from a variety. The two perspectives differ in their interpretation, that is in the underlying reasons for the observed linguistic patterns. The systematic linguistic patterns associated with the register perspective exist because linguistic variation is functional. Linguistic features are used frequently in a register when they are required by the situational characteristics of the register as described in section 1.3. In contrast, the linguistic patterns associated with styles are not functional. Rather, these are features associated with aesthetic preferences influenced by the speaker or writer attitudes about language. That is, a speaker or author often has attitudes about what constitutes good style, resulting in the manipulation of language for aesthetic purposes. Style are normally described for the text within a register or genre. The most common application of this concept is to describe systematic variation within the register or genre of fiction. However, a similar notion of style or conversational style, example Tannen 2005, meaning that they have different norms for how they usually structure a conversation relating to different speech rates, different pause lengths between turns, whether overlapping speech is considered to be polite or not, etc. Particular fictional styles are often associated with individual authors. For example, authors like Virginia Woolf and Toni Morrison preferred a fictional style with extremely long complex sentences mixed in with very short single clause sentences. In contrast, an author like Ernest Hemingway preferred a style with consistently short, simple sentences, but styles can also be associated with different groups of authors or different historical periods. For example, in Module 8, we discussed how fictional style in the 18th century was generally different from contemporary fictional style. The key point here is that these differences are not functional. For example, the situational context for novels written by all authors is essentially the same. Rather, these linguistic differences are stylistic, reflecting differing attitudes towards language, or attempts to achieve different aesthetic effects through the manipulation of language. As noted above, the same text or varieties can be considered from register, genre, and style perspectives. For example, a genre perspective on scientific research articles will describe the conventional rhetorical structure of complete articles, how they begin with a title, the author's name, and an abstract followed by the introduction, method section, results, discussion, or conclusion, and then concluding with a bibliography. However, these same scientific research articles can be studied from a register perspective, identifying the core linguistic features that are pervasive in this kind of writing. Example, long noun phrases, nominalization, passive verbs, and explaining the preference for those linguistic features in functional terms by reference to the production circumstances of writing and the typical communicative purposes of research articles. And the same text can be studied from a style perspective, identifying the linguistic features associated with a particular author or particular historical period, in association with notions of good writing or prose that is aesthetically pleasing. 1.4.2 Genre and Style in Literary Studies. If you have experience with literary studies, you are probably already familiar with the concept of literary genre. Varieties of literature that employ different textual conventions. This is use of the term genre is similar to our use in the present course because of the emphasis on textual conventions. For example, three major literary genres are poetry, drama, and fictional prose. Read through text samples 1.6 to 1.8 and make note of any textual conventions that distinguish among these genres. What do you notice about the difference among these three texts? The most obvious is probably the physical layout on the page by convention. fictional prose is presented as paragraphs, with an indentation and the start of the paragraph, and each line filling the entire page. Fictional prose also normally employs complete sentences and standard sentence punctuation. Drama has different convention. It portrays conversational dialogue and so has a format that first identifies who the speaker is, followed by the utterance for that speaker. Drama is intended to be performed in speech, even though its origin is in writing. As a result, a dramatic text also includes language that is in writing. It gives instruction for the performance, identifying events that occur during a conversation, or describing the manner of speaking that an actor should adopt. Poetry differs from both drama and prose in that the physical arrangement of text on the page is part of the creative effect. Poetry can employ complete sentences, but the arrangement of lines on the page is more important, meaning relationships in poetry are often constructed from the physical juxtaposition of words and lines, rather than through the use of complete sentences. There is extensive linguistic variation among the texts within a literary genre, and this is where the style perspective becomes especially important to describe the characteristic discourse associated with different authors or time periods reflecting different aesthetic preferences. Like registers, style can be described in terms of the frequent and pervasive linguistic features used in different kinds of discourse. For example, 18th century fictional style is characterized by extremely long sentences, while 20th century fiction generally uses much shorter sentences. Authors also differ in their characteristic styles. Sometimes famously, for example, Defoe is well known for writing in a simple and plain style of fiction. In contrast to the more typical styles of discourse in the early 18th century, Johnson, writing in the second half of the 18th century, is instead known for a highly elaborated style of discourse. See the discussion of author style in fiction in Module 5 and 8. Literary style can be studied using the same analytical techniques as registers. However, the underlying cause of style variation are related to aesthetic preferences and attitudes about language, rather than the more direct functional influence from the communicative situation. For the most part, our focus in the present course is on the analysis of everyday kinds of speaking and writing, rather, rather than the literature. However, in Module 5, we return to the fictional prose describing some of its special situational and linguistic characteristics. Then, in Module 8, we show how historical change in the literary styles of novels can be approached from a linguistic perspective. Register 1.4.3 Register genre and style in previous research. The terms register, genre, and style have been central to previous investigations of the discourse, but they have been used in many different ways. Our treatment in the present course builds on this previous research, but it does not attempt to reconcile all previous definitions of these terms. As you read other studies, it is important to be aware that there is no general consensus concerning the use of the term register and related terms such as genre and style. Register and genre have both been used to refer the varieties associated with particular situations of use and particular communicative purposes. Many studies simply adopt of these terms and disregard the other. For example, Biber 1988, Bhatia 2002, Samraj 2002 A and B, Bonton 2002, Love 2002, Swales 1990, 2004, exclusively use the term genre rather than register. In some of these studies, example, Swales 1990, the analysis focuses primarily in the organizational structure of whole text. while in others, example Biver, 1988, it focused on pervasive linguistic patterns other studies. Ure, 1982, Ferguson, 1983, Himes, 1984, Heath and Langman, 1994, Brathukes, 1994-1996, Biber, 1995, Conrad, 2001, and Biber et al., 1999. Exclusively use the term register. Some textbook in social linguistics. Sample: Trudhill, 1974, Wardhoff, 1992, have used the term register in a highly restrictive sense to refer only to occupational varieties, such as computer programmer talk or auto mechanic talk. Relatively few earlier studies use both the terms register and genre. Relatively few earlier studies used both the terms register and genre and made a theoretical distinction between them. Most notable is work in systemic functional linguistics, a theoretical framework based on work by Halliday 1978, which is concerned with the interaction of form, function, and context in human communication. In this framework, genre and register are said to be on different semiotic planes. Martin, 1985. Genre is viewed as a social process in which participants within a culture use language in predictable, sequential structures to fulfill certain communicative purposes. Couture, 1986 to 80, calls genres conventional stances of organized text. Register, on the other hand, has been characterized as the expression plane. On genre, Martin, 1985, and is more concerned, concerned with the typical linguistic choices within different genres. The choices are seen as resulting from contextual variables called field, tenor, and mode in systemic functional linguistics, which truly mean topics, actions of language, participants, relationships, and textual organization. The distinction between register and genre in the present course shares some characteristics with these terms in systemic functional linguistics, especially with respect to the genre perspective emphasizing the conventional features of whole text, while the register perspective emphasizes variation in the use of linguistic features. See also Ferguson, 1994, Systemic Functional Linguistics, however, has an extensive theoretical framework associated with these concepts. See Hal J. 1978, 1989, Martin, 1985, 1997, 2001, Mathisen, 1993. Finally, another perspective on the study of genres has an entirely different focus from the present course, sometimes called the New Rhetoric Approach. Highland 2002a. This perspective is more concerned with the socio-cultural context of different message types and the work that genres do, rather than describing linguistic characteristics of text. In such studies, in ethnographic descriptions of a particular community and the use and learning of genres within it. Example, Artemeva 2008 are more typical than linguistic description, while such studies are interesting for what they tell us about how language use is situated in socio-cultural context. They are less relevant for our purposes in the present course, which focuses more narrowly on the linguistic analysis of text. The term style has perhaps been used for an even wider range of concepts than either of the other terms. In the 1960s, descriptive linguists used the term style to refer to general situational varieties. Similar to our use of register in the present course, see Hughes, 1961, Crystal and Davy, 1969. Quantitative sociolinguists in the Lavovian tradition use the term style to refer to language used for different purposes during a sociolinguistic interview. Sociolinguistic styles are interpreted as reflecting production circumstances that require differing amounts of attention to speech. Example, reading word lists versus an interview. See Lavouv, 1966-1972. In our final module, we return to a fuller discussion of sociolinguistic style variation in comparison to register variation. See section 9.4. More commonly, style has been treated as a characteristic way of using language. This general perspective has most often been applied to literary language, often referred to as stylistic style in this sense, as being studied as a characteristic of particular genres, particular periods, particular authors, and even particular texts. Example, Leach and Short, 1981, Freeborn, 1996, Paul Simpson, 2004. This usage can also carry an evaluative sense, as when writing handbooks discuss writing with style, which carries the implication that many people write without style. Finally, as noted above, a similar notion of style has been used to study conversational interaction. Words culture can be described as having distinctive conversational styles. Example, Tannen, 2005. A number of publications are available for learning more about researchers and theories. Use of these terms. Useful places to start include the general overviews in Lee, 2001, in Highland, 2002a 1022, while Noonan, 2008, provides an accessible introduction to the concepts of genre and register in systematic functional linguistics. 1.5 Register genre variation as a linguistic universal. All culture use language for different communicative purposes in different situations. Register variation focuses on the pervasive patterns of linguistic variation across such situations. In association with the functions served by linguistic features, genre variation focuses on the conventional ways in which complete texts of different types are structured. Taken together, register genre variation is a fundamental aspect of human language. All cultures and language have an array of registers, genres, and all human controls a range of registers, genres. The universal nature of registered genre variation has been noted by many previous scholars, for example, register variation, in which language structure varies in accordance with the occasions of use, is all pervasive in human language. Ferguson, 1983, 154. No human being talks the same way all the time. At the very least, a variety of registers and style is used and encountered. Himes, 1984, 44. Each language community has its own system of registers, corresponding to the range of activities in which its members normally engage. Uren, 1982, 5. Given the ambiguity of registered genre variation and understanding of how linguistic features are used in patterned ways across text varieties is of central importance for both the description of particular language and the development of cross-linguistic theories of language use. Hence urged that the analysis of register genre variation verbal repertoire in his term should become the major focus of research within linguistics. The sociolinguistic perspective has the possibility of taking the lead in transforming the study of language through developing and consolidating the systematic study of verbal repertoire, not language, the central scientific notion. all societies and language have a number of registers, genres, they do not necessarily have equivalent sets. For example, some language societies have only spoken registers, genres. In such cases, there might be individual speakers who are capable of producing language in all registers, genres of the language. In contrast, modern literate societies incorporate a much larger of spoken and written text varieties. As a result, no individual speaker-writer can control the full set of text varieties found in the culture. Previous studies have documented these differences, noting that historical change in the system of text varieties in a language is fundamentally important. For example, the register range of a language is one of the most immediate ways in which it responds to social change. The difference between developed and undeveloped language is fundamentally one of register range and language contact, which contributes to language development, is mediated by particular registers. This issue is concerned with both the pressures that make for change and the way in which these changes are realized linguistically. Huren 1982, 7. One of the two main tasks requiring attention within sociolinguistics at present is the description and analysis of the organization and change of verbal repertoires in relation to the main processes of societal evaluation of our time. Hymns 1984, 44, 45. Register genre variation is a universal because all cultures use language in different situations for different communicative purposes. In this module, we have repeatedly noted that we regard the register perspective as the most important because linguistic features are functional. They are used to greater and lesser extents in different situations, and thus any text sample of any type can be described from the register perspective. This functional association between linguistic forms and situations of use results in the systematic patterns of register variation. The primary goal of the present course is thus to introduce you to these linguistic patterns and to equip you with the tools needed to carry out your own register analysis. In addition, we will continue to describe patterns of genre variation and style variation, especially when those perspectives provide useful insights on a particular text variety. Thank you. I am Maria Isabel Asuncion to present this module.